Sipur Yitziat Mitzrayim. The Rambam writes in Perek Zayin, Mitzvos Aseh Shel Torah L'Saper B'Nisim V'Niflo Shenasu Avoseinu B'Mitzrayim. V'Tzorach Lahaskel B'Gnus U'L'Sayim B'Shvach. Ketzad. And the Rambam goes on to say, V'hu sheyidrosh mi'arami oved ovi ad sheyigmar es kol ha'parsha kul. Kol ha'mosif u'marech b'drash parsha zu ha'reiz zeh meshubach. Kol mishalo omar shlosha dvarim elu b'Pesach, dvarim elu kulam nikraim Hagada. And the Rambam writes that they are all included in something called Hagada. He doesn't mention Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim at the end. He starts with Mitzvah Shel Torah L'Saper Yitzias Mitzrayim. And then he ends with Kol HaDvarim Ha'elu Kulam Hagada. What did the Rambam intend to emphasize here by including everything under the word Hagada? And the truth is that the Rambam is not really at fault, because we are going to learn a Mishnah, Mirz Hashem, in Arvei Pesachim, on Daf Kuf Tes Zayin, Kuf Tes Vav Amid Beis, and the Gemara there is going to talk about Ein Okrenes HaShulchan El Lifnei Misha Omer Hagada. So the Mishnah itself calls Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim Hagada. But again, and the Gemara itself also says Manti Omer Hagada, but why does the Gemara call Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim with another name? What's the implication of the word Hagada? Are you with me, Steve? I don't know if you're there or not. So the Gemara says the following. Oh, you are. The Mishnah says, V'doresh me'arami oved ovi at sheyigmar kol ha'parsha kula. And the Rambam copies that Mishnah. V'hu sheyidrosh me'arami oved ovi at sheyigmar kol ha'parsha. V'chol ha'mosif u'marech b'drash parsha zu harei zu mishubah. Harei zu mishubah. So the Rambam is telling us that kol amar b'dvarim ha she'iru v'shahayu harei meshubach. So that's already written in Perek Zayin. What did the Rambam add here when he says, Toda Rabba, that kol amar b'dvarim she'iru v'shahayu harei meshubach? And the added addition here is that the marbe b'dvarim has to be fulfilled in a certain specific way, in a certain format or frame, and that is through drash parshas arami ovid ovi. So we see that the mitzvah Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, if it's done properly and it's fulfilled, must require not just Sipur Dvarim, not just to tell stories, but rather you need dafka a mitzvah of Talmud Torah. How do you fulfill the mitzvah of Talmud Torah? Talmud Torah has two parts to it. It has Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh. And that's called Yidrosh Parshas Arami Oved Omi Kula. In other words, we're going to darshan the parsha. We're going to combine and integrate both Torah Shebechsav and Torah Shebal Peh. That's the way we fulfill the mitzvah of Sipur. So again, even though you'll have a minimum kiyum, you'll achieve some basic mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim just by telling the stories. And the Rambam says, Keitzadim hayakatan o tipesh omerlo b'ni kulanu ayinu avadim k'mo shifchazu o k'mo evitzeh. Fine, but the real, complete, perfect kiyum, the ideal kiyum of mitzvah Sipur b'shleimus, is only through Talmud Torah. And what Talmud Torah? To darshan the parsha of Harami Ovid. That's the way you fulfill the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. Now, the question I want to raise with you is, why is that called Hagada? In other words, I understand that it's not enough to tell the story. That's not the perfect cue. But rather he has to do a maisa of Talmud Torah. but I'm not sure why that's called Hagada. Anybody know the answer to that question? Let's see. Maybe we'll hold on and we'll see if it comes around the bend. He says the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim includes within it the study of the laws of Pesach. And how do we know this? This is based on a Tosefta. The Tosefta says, Chayav Odom Lasok Behilchas HaPesach Kol HaLayla Afilu Beino Levein Beno U'Maisav R'Mulivos Kenim Shoyim Mesubim Bebeis Baitus Ben Zonin Belud Vayu Oskim Behilchas HaPesach Kol HaLayla Ad Kros HaGov Higbiu Milfneim V'Noadu V'Holchu Lebeis HaMedrash. And he quotes the Agos Maimonides at the end of Hilchas Chometz U'Matzah that bases himself on this Tosefta. So we see clearly that part and parcel of Sipur is to learn to study the laws of Pesach. And therefore, we understand very well in the Haggadah, it says, Omar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Reini Kiven Shivim Shanav Lo Zachisi Shetiyomer Yetzias Mitzrayim Ba'Leilos. So what is this doing here in the Haggadah? I mean, this discussion is about the mitzvah of Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim. But in the Nusach of the Haggadah of the Rambam, it says, Omar Lahem Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So it means that this piece and this paragraph is a continuation of the previous paragraph that Hayu Mesubim b'Bnei Brak, Hayu Mesaprim b'Tzipur Yetzias Mitzrayim Kol HaLayla. And on that very night, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, whose name appears in the list of Tanoim, he explained that the mitzvah of Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim applies even at night. And that's exactly what the Baal HaGadah is trying to teach us, that part and parcel of the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is to dedicate oneself to the study of Hilchas HaPesach. And Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, which is a mitzvah noheges kol hashana kula, is shaychus, it has a connection to Inyanei HaPesach. And the chiddush of the Baal HaGadah is that you can be mekayim this dimension of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, namely of learning the laws of Pesach, even through the mitzvah of Zechiras Yetzias Mitzrayim, hanoheges bechol hashana kula. What is the source for this conclusion that learning the laws of Pesach is part and parcel of the mitzvah Sipur? That's not intuitively obvious. And he says, we'll look at the parsha of Ben HaChacham. What is the answer that we give to the Ben HaChacham? Af ata amar lo kehilchas haPesach, ein maftir nachar Pesach afikomen. And the Gra, the Vilna Gaon, has a girsa ad ein maftir nachar Pesach afikomen. That means we learn all of the halachas of Pesach from the beginning until the end. So ad means that this is the last Mishnah in Masechta Pesachim, ein maftir nachar Pesach afikomen. And if you look in the parsha, in Vayeschanan, ki yishalcha bincha mochar lemar ma edus v'achukim v'mishpatim v'shatziva Hashem Elkeichem Elska, the question of the Ben is Hilchas Talmud Torah. Right? You can see that when the Ben raises his question, he says, Edus, Chukim, Mishpatim. He's a real lamdan. He classifies the laws of the Torah into different categories, whether it's Edus, whether it's Chukim, Mishpatim. And he wants to study these categories. This is a question in Hilchas Talmud Torah. And what do we answer him? Vayitzavenu Hashem lasos es kol hachukim ha'ela. So it's limud Hilchas HaPesach. And that becomes an integral part of the mitzvah, the primary mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And the Mechilta adds that from the pasuk Ma Edus we derive the chiyuv to be osek b'Hilchas HaPesach. So we see clearly, just to summarize, the bottom line of everything we studied, that included in the Chiyuv of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, specifically in the Ben HaChacham, is Talmud Torah, Moha Edus. And through Talmud Torah, we fulfill the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. How do we fulfill the part of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim? That's not pure halacha, but rather it's the story of the miracles and the redemption. That's through the drash of Parshas Aromi Ovid. But we also have an additional dimension of the mitzvah Sipur Mitzrayim through Talmud Torah, and that's to learn Hilchas HaPesach with our sons, with our Talmidim. It's what we call a Chefetz of Talmud Torah. Now we can answer perhaps our original question. Why does the Rambam call it Hagada? And he says the following. The Pasuk says, I believe it's in Yisro, correct me. It says, Ko tomar lebeis Yaakov, v'tagid lebnei Yisrael. There's a mitzvah of Vishinantam Levanecha the whole year round. And so too on the night of Pesach, there's a mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, a father to a son. That's also part of Talmud Torah. And the pasuk says, "V'sagid lifnei Yisrael miloshen Hagada." So the mitzvah of transmitting Torah to one's son, to one's children, is v'sagid, is v'loshen Hagada. So the chiyuv Hagada is a chiyuv of Talmud Torah. And the Rambam, after he clarifies the obligation and establishes that we have to be Doresh Parshas Aromid Avi, he brings the statement of Rabbi Gamliel, Kol Shelo Omar Shlosha Dvarim Alolu, Kulam Im Chefetz Shel Talmud Torah. This is a mission that we're going to have on Kuf Tes Zayin. And then the Rambam tells us that all of the above are called Hagada, meaning Hagada Tagid L'Bnei Yisrael. It's all part of a matrix of Talmud Torah. And the section in Haggadah that begins with Dalid Banim, Kineged Arba Banim Dibra Torah, starts with Baruch HaMokom Baruch Hu, Baruch Shenosan Torah Liyama Yisrael. Well, what are we saying here? What relevance does this have on the night of Pesach? But the answer is that since Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim is fulfilled through Talmud Torah, V'sagid L'Bnei Yisrael, the Haggadah opens up with Birchas HaTorah. So if you ask the question, why is there no bracha on the mitzvah of Haggadah? The answer is he already recited a bracha on Talmud Torah. Or alternatively, Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu, Baruch Shenasan Torah Liyam Yisrael is a bracha on Talmud Torah. You see, I think there's a piece missing over here, in my humble opinion. There are two mitzvahs of Talmud Torah. There's the general mitzvah of Talmud Torah that encompasses all of the Torah. And then there's a specific mitzvah of Talmud Torah for Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. So therefore, the first bracha that we recited in the morning of Pesach, which is Birchas HaTorah, that's not sufficient. That covers the general, all-inclusive mitzvah of Talmud Torah. But here we have a specific mitzvah of Talmud Torah to learn the Torah of Pesach, of Yetzias Mitzrayim. That requires its own bracha, and that's the bracha that we recite at Haggadah, Baruch HaMakom Baruch Hu. I would add another comment here that according to this presentation, you might wonder why isn't there Shem U'Malchus? It should be a full-fledged bracha. Okay. Now he has a section about the time for Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. I would like to fast forward at this point to Reish Yud Beis. Kol dichvin yesei v'yecha. Kol ditzrich yesei v'yifsach. What is this section, this paragraph doing in the Haggadah? So we look in the Gemara in Tainus on Daf Chafam in Beis, and the Gemara describes Rav Huna ki havi karech rifta, when he would break bread, who have a Pesach livavye v'yomar kol ditzrich leisei v'lecha. It sounds like Rav Huna on a daily basis would open up his doors and invite anyone who needs food, who needs bread, to come and break bread with him. So if that be the case, then why do we recite Kol Dichvin on the night of Pesach? So the Rav says the following, that on Leil Pesach we have a Chiv Laharis Atzma Kiluhu Yotziv Yitzrayim Yavdus Lecheres. So we're going to recite this invitation as a Kiyuv of Derech Cheres. An Eved, he's not capable of inviting anyone to his Suda because he's not in possession of anything. Everything belongs to his master. But once he's a Ben Chorin, then he owns his food, his Su'uda, and to demonstrate his Cherus, he's going to invite others to eat with him and break bread with him in his Suda. So therefore, there was a takana of this Amira at the beginning of the Hagada and the Sipur, because that's their Cherus. That demonstrates Cherus. And now we understand that even if Rav Huna would the whole year round invite people to his Suda, called Ditzuf Leisei V'Lechal, but now on this night, there's a special chiyuv. The only thing that bothers me about this is it doesn't seem very practical in reality. I mean, you're sitting down at your Seder table, inviting people to join you. Like, what are the chances, give it a break, that somebody's going to really join you? Because you're sitting and inviting. You don't even have a microphone that reaches out to the shul. And even if you had a microphone, we don't do electricity on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Now he quotes the Vilna Gaon that there's a special kiyum of tzedakah that's included under the mitzvah of matzah, what we call mos chitin. And that's mentioned in the Yerushalmi. And the Gaon is medayik this in the digduk, the grammar of the pasuk. The pasuk says, "Matzos ye'achel shivas yomim." It doesn't say yochal shivas yomim in the active, but ye'achel means causative. Ye'achel, you cause someone else to eat it. And that's the kiyum of tzedakah, that by giving mos chitin, you're facilitating the ani to buy and eat matzah, especially today that matzah is so expensive. So now we could say that kol dichvin yesei v'yechol is part and parcel of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Why? Because the mitzvah Sipur is connected to the matzah, and the full-fledged kiyum of matzah is not just to buy and eat your own matzahs, but to donate matzahs for the poor person. So the kol dichvin, which indicates that we are going to supply mos chitin for the aniyim, that's the kiyum of what? Of matzos ye'achel, shivas yom. And anything that's related to the dinim of matzah, like the kiyum of tzedakah for mos chitin, is germane to the seder. So just to summarize, there are two answers to the question, why are we opening the Haggadah with Kol Dichvin and invite the Aniyim? The first answer is because he's showing that he's a Ben Chorin, he's got possessions of his own, he's not like an Ani, a poor person who, or an Eved, I should say, who is totally dependent on the Rishus, on the permission that he gets from his Adon, from his master, to go ahead and invite people to eat from his bread. And secondly, this kol dichvin yesei v'yechal is a kiyum of matzah ye'achel, to provide the aniyim for matzah, with matzah. But now there's an additional passage here called Dichvin Yesei v'Yifsach. I mean, Kol Dichvin Yesei v'Yechal could be an invitation to eat the matzah, but Kol Ditzrich Yesei v'Yifsach is an invitation to eat the Korban Pesach. But Rav Soloveitchik says it's not an invitation to eat the Korban Pesach, but it's really a clone, so to speak. In other words, this invitation of Kol Dichvin Yesei v'Yechal really belongs to the morning of Erev Pesach, not to Pesach at night, because it's an invitation to be a manui on the Pesach, right? There's a din of minui, the michsas nefashos, right? So we get together as a group and we purchase a lamb, a Korban Pesach together as one entity. And now we're inviting someone who needs to be part of a chabura for the Korban Pesach to join our chabura. So now we're not addressing the aniyim as we did in the Kol Ditzrich Yesei v'Yechal, Kol Dichvin, I should say, but rather whoever needs to be money on a Korban Pesach and to become part of a chabura, we are inviting him to Korban Pesach. Slicha, ani chol vakesh. Slicha, ani chol vakesh mincha shetetzei bachutz im lo tiyani peshut v'lanei toda. Okay. So therefore, he says that there's a kiyum in Korban Pesach of minui, right? And the friends and the neighbors will get together as one group for the Korban Pesach. And he says there's a machlokas tanoim in the sugyas of Pesach Sheni there in the last half of Masechta Pesachim Tzadi Aleph, whether we can shech the Pesach on a yochid. And we paskin that yes, you can shech the Pesach on a yochid. But the Rambam writes in Perek Beis Milchos Korban Pesach, u'mishtadlim shelo yishchat lechatchila yochid. In other words, if the situation is ideal, you will have other people together with you menuyim on the Korban Pesach. So therefore, Kol Ditzrich means if you have not been invited, you're in need of being invited, although you can make your own Korban Pesach, b'yochid. But since the Rambam says that lechatchila, a person should be mishtadel shelo yishchat ala yochid, but rather should be part of a minui, therefore Kol Ditzrich Yesei v'Yifsach. Halayla zeh kulanu misubin, which means that we're all doing achila b'seva. But we could answer that we should reinterpret this. Misubin means heseba b'chabura, and we're talking about a minui on the Korban Pesach, because the Gemara says in Brachos Mem Gimel lo yesef b'chabura shel ami haaretz, and the Gemara in Brachos on Daf Mem Vav Ketzad Seder heseba. And this might be referring to Leil Pesach, that we have a chiyuv to eat the Korban Pesach b'chabura. My only comment on this last paragraph is that today, Bisman is that we don't have the Korban Pesach, ain't based on English Kaim, and therefore, what does it mean to invite someone to be money on the Pesach and then to ask him on Ishtana, Kuladu Mesubin, doesn't make any sense to me. For example, at the time of the Mishnah, they asked Balayla Zek Hulot Tzli, that we eat the basar tzli. And we don't have that in our Manishtana today because we don't have the Korban Pesach. Avodim hayiru lefaro b'Mitzrayim. This is a response in Dvarim Perek Vav to the Ben HaChacham. Now, why does it say avodim hayinu lifaro? Why doesn't it say avdei paro hayinu? That would have been a short and more concise phrase. And the answer is because Klal Yisrael, although they were avdei paro, but you could never call them avdei paro. That's called a shem toar. You know, when you give a person a description and a name, avdei paro, that phrase will never appear with regard to Klal Yisrael. We are not avdei paro. Our avdus is in the guf, bishvil paro. We're working for paro. But the atzmusam on an existential level in terms of the pnimius, we are never avdei paro. We never were avdei paro. We'll never become avdei paro. And the Medrash says in Shmos Rabbah, Melamed shehoyu biyoda megilos. They had scrolls in Mitzrayim. Shoyu mishtashim bahem b'Shabbos l'Shabbos. Sometimes they got off a little time on Saturday and they would study these Megillos. And what was written in the Megillos? Lomar shakadosh baruch hu go'alam. There was a divine guarantee, a divine promise that God will redeem them. So we see that Klal Yisrael, even during the time of their avdus, they were always sustained by a faith and a belief in the Geula, despite the terrible avdus that they were serving. So they were never really existentially avdei paro. Avodim hayinu leparo b'Mitzrayim, but not avdei paro. Vayomru avdei paro. But with regard to the servants of Paro, they're called avdei paro. That's their essential description of personality. They are essentially avdei paro. Like sometimes you ask a person, who are you? And he says, I'm a doctor. He identifies his very essence as being a doctor. And that could be true for any occupation. You know, I'm a painter, I'm a carpenter, I'm a nurse, whatever it might be. You identify with your occupation. Who are you? I'm avdei paro. That's who I am. If you open up the yellow pages, there's going to be a section called avdei paro. But Klal Yisrael will never be in that section of the yellow pages. They never identify themselves essentially as avdei paro. Avdei paro haya begufam ubenafsham. That's their very essence. Their very spirit and soul is avdei paro, but not so Klal Yisrael. In Hallel, we recite a kapitel Tilim, Hallelu avdei Hashem, v'lo avdei paro. We are avdei Hashem. That defines our essence. You ask a Jew, who are you? His response should be, I'm an Eved Hashem, but not an Eved Leparo. Vayotzienu Hashem Elokeinu misham. The pasuk says, Vayotzienu Hashem. It does not say Elokeinu. The word Elokeinu appears in the Hagada, but not in the biblical formulation. So the Rav says that on Leil Pesach, when we have the mitzvah of Sipra Ge'ulo P'dus Nafshenu, and that really commemorates and celebrates our emergence as Avdei Hashem and not Avdei Paro, the Ikar Ge'ula is that Klal Yisrael became Avdei Hashem. Al Yidei Kabbalas HaTorah VaMitzvos, Shari Nemar B'Loshen Revi'ah Shal HaGeula Lakachti Eschem Lili Am. And what does that mean? Lakachti Eschem Lili Am. Al Yidei Matan Torah, the Geula was completed. So in other words, even though the Klal Yisrael are going out of Mitzrayim and they're being liberated from slavery, nevertheless their Geula, their redemption is not complete until they reach 7 weeks later Har Sinai. That's Matan Torah, which completes their Geula. Ein lecha ben chorin ela mish osek b'Torah. The real cherus and geula is someone who's osek b'Torah. And therefore, already on the Leil Yitzia, when Klal Yisrael went out of Mitzrayim, they left Mitzrayim for the sake and for the purpose of being Makabel the Torah Har Sinai. And the pasuk says, "B'yotziacha es ha'am miMitzrayim tavdu nes Elokim al ha'ar hazeh." So why does the Baal Hagada add a word to the pasuk that doesn't appear in the pasuk, namely Elokeinu? Vayotzienu Hashem Elokeinu misham. And the answer is that Elokeinu means Kabbalas Malchusa. You are our Melech. We are Avdei Hashem. We're no longer Avdei Paro. That's the Geula. That's why the Ikra Geula is going to be clinched at Har Sinai with Kabbalas Malchusa when we accept the Taryag Mitzvahs, Nasa v'Nishma. But already at the Yetziah of Mitzrayim, they were already declaring, we are Avdei Hashem. And the word Elokeinu is an extra emphasis here of Kabbalas O Malchus Shamayim. Mishubadim ayinu lefaro b'Mitzrayim. Yesh la'ayin, my time was shina Baal Hagada es haloshon loma mishubadim hayinu. What does it mean, mishubadim hayinu? We were committed to the slavery of Paro. It should have said, Anu ubanenu avodim hayinu. Right? The original opening line of the Haggadah was avodim hayinu lefar Mitzrayim. And here, there's a change in the language. And instead of saying, Harei anu banenu avodim hayinu, but rather it says, Harei mishubadim hayinu lefar Mitzrayim. What's the difference between avodim and mishubad? So let's just think if we can come up with an answer to this question. I don't see it. Let's see. Lo hotzionu Hashem Elokeinu mishomer yitochen shebemeshech hashanim, right? B'meshech hadoros hayaparo mishacheres b'nei Yisrael. Aval oz klal Yisrael yimechuyovim b'hakaras hatov leparo. V'yu mishubadim elo b'chiv hakaras hatov v'zeu hakavana mishubadim hayid. Wow. This I never ever would have come up with on my own. The Baal Hagada is saying that if God had not taken us out of Mitzrayim, we would still be mishubadim to Paro, even if somewhere down the line Paro would allow us to go free, we would still be mishubad, and that's the mid of Hakaras Hatov. Hakaras Hatov means you owe him one, and if you owe him one, you still are mishubad to him. Mitzvah aleinu l'saper b'yetzias Mitzrayim. L'chora, hayitzarech lomer l'saper al yetzias Mitzrayim. We should be speaking, telling about yetzias Mitzrayim. What does that phrase mean? L'saper b'yetzias Mitzrayim. What's the base of b'yetzias Mitzrayim? And he says the following: Lahoros lanu shetzuras umadbeas sipur. Who be ofen she kanes bekol she yachnis bekol kocho the kochi litoch tocham shel in yonei asipu. Umitzvah lesaper bechol aprotim im kol haergeshin. Ad kidei sheyiras atzon kilu yotzim sevizol is saper biyetzias Mitzrayim. Lios munach kol kulo beguf hasipur. The sipur kim shebelevu mechuyav lios munach kulo beguf hasipur. I suspect that this is a translation from Yiddish. Did you ever hear the phrase in Yiddish, I licked in them? He's munach in them in modern Hebrew. So I'm totally emotionally given over to the experience of Yetzias Mitzrayim. So my sipur is be Yetzias Mitzrayim. Kulo, gufo kulo, be Yetzias Mitzrayim. He's called kulo munach begufo besipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. All right, let's see if we have time, 5 more minutes for one more piece here on Reish Yud Daled. Afilu kulanu chacham. The Rambam in Perek Zayin, Milchus Chametz U'Matzah, Mitzvah Sasei Shel Torah L'Saper B'Nisim V'Niflos V'Afal Pi She'en Lo Ben Afilu Chachamim Gedolim Chayovim L'Saper B'Tzias Mitzrayim V'Chol HaMarich B'Dvarim She'iru V'Shahoyu Harei Kedem. Now, what is the sequence of these halachos over here? The Rambam wants to emphasize that even if he doesn't have a son, he's still obligated the mitzvah of Hagada to lebincha. And therefore, the Rambam says that he should be mesaper liatzma. And then the Rambam says, afilu chachamim gedolim. And then call amarich l'saper, etc., etc. But what is he saying over here? He says he doesn't have a son, or he's a chacham, and then he says, call amar l'saper. It doesn't fit into one flowing logical sequence. And he says the following, that Ein Lo Ben and Chacham Gadol is really fundamentally one and the same. The chiyuv of Sipur Yisrael is kol amar b'lesaper areisa meshuba. What does that mean? Ribui Sipur. And the answer is, it's not just simply arichas dvarim, just talk and expand and lengthy, but rather it's a new chiyuv. And what does this chiyuv require? Hosafa. You have to add something to the sipur, to the essential story that you're telling. And he says the following: the obligation of Sipur is to reveal and to notify the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, as the Rambam writes, mitzvah lo diel bebanim. And this is only appropriate if he has a son. If he doesn't have a son, then what is he adding? Well, what's this requirement to add something new? I mean, what is he telling himself something new? If he knows it, it's not a Hosafa. And how much more so if he's a chacham, or we're all chachamim here at the table. So what shaykh is, how could he be mosif or modia and add and enhance the story if they all know the story? We're talking about chachamim. But the answer is kol amar b'lesaper areisa meshuba, which means the following, that the obligation of Sipur is not just to tell the story, the facts on the ground, like a history book, what happened and what caused what. There's a new chiyuv, lahosif bechol prat uprat ula omek ula rocha. We come up with new ideas. and we clarify and shed light on every single detail in a deep, profound, and wide way. That chiyuv could apply even if he doesn't have a son, even if he's a chacham v'navan, he's a great scholar. Because when it comes to his amkus, to get deeper and deeper, to mechadish more and more chidushim, new dvar, new biurim in Sipur Yisrael, not to be satisfied with going over the old stuff that he knows from year to year, but to be orer laharbos lahosef in Sipur Yisrael. So this is means there's no gvul, there's no kitzvah, there's no end, there's no completion and termination of Sipur. You got to do more and more to reveal the miracle, and therefore even Chachamim Gedolim on mitzvah l'samek b'Sipur, and even if he doesn't have a son, he's machadish chidushim to himself by being misamek. And therefore the Rambam's sequence is very logical. He opens up by telling us that mitzvah saseh shel Torah l'saper, and then he says afal pishen lo ben afilu chachamim and kol hamarach l'saper, because kol hamarach is telling me that his amkus and the chidushim and the new insights and the answers to questions, revealing new ideas and dimensions of Sipur Yisrael, that is the essence of the mitzvah. And therefore, even if he doesn't have a son, he should still be involved in that dedicated to that enterprise and that agenda. And even if he's a chacham, he still has to do that. So the Rambam's language is very, very meduya. Okay, then. So this is where we'll stop. Today is Thursday, correct? So let me wish you a Shabbat Shalom and a great Shabbos, and thank you so much. We'll get back to Sanhedrin Hashem next week. All right, then.